Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our special work session of the Las Cruces City Council, and we should have a member or two of our Planning and Zoning Commission. But before we begin, if you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Is Clint Thacker here? Okay, I don't see him. How about Dr. Payadas? Oh, there you are. You're going to give... And Dr. Payadas will give us our jobs of the week.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Francisco Payares for the record, members of the City Council. For today's Jobs of the Week, the City of Las Cruces is hiring a human resource analyst. This position is going to be closing on September the 1st of 2021. Also, NMSU is hiring groundskeeper, and this position will be closing on the 24th, so actually pretty close. There's a cook and dishwasher for Discovery Child Development Company. This one is going to be closing on September 15th. There's also a CAD tech for Souder with Miller and Associates. This position closing on the 17th of September. There's also a position available for Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act WIOA Administrator for the South Central Council of Governments. And this will be closing on the 9th of September. For a full list of jobs, internships, and volunteer opportunities, also for those individuals that want to advertise a job, you can go to www.employeenem.com and also at governmentjobs.com/careers/Las Cruces. And the phone number for our partners at New Mexico Workforce Connections is 575-524-6250, and they're located at 226 South Alameda Boulevard. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council.
Thank you for that, Dr. Payadas. Okay, so we have one item on the agenda, and that is the City of Las Cruces Development Code Update and Code Diagnostics. And so it looks like David Cedillo will start this off, and then we'll go ahead and see if there's any questions from both our planning and zoning members as well as our city council.
Well, good afternoon, Mayor and Council, P&Z Chair and Commission members, David Cedillo, Public Works Director, and it is my honor to introduce to you the city's consultant, Fries and Nichols, who will be presenting to you the city's Code Diagnostics and Analysis Report this afternoon. With that, I would like to introduce Ms. Erica Craycroft and Don Warwick. And they will be doing the presentation and taking any questions after the presentation, and city staff is also available for any questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cedillo. Good afternoon, everyone. And again, my name is Erica Craycraft with Fries and Nichols. And thank you for having us. We are excited to be here with you to talk about the Development Code Update. So again, with team introductions, my name is Erica Craycraft, and I'm with Fries and Nichols. I am the project manager for the consultant team. Also with us today, again, is Don Warwick and Karen Perez, also with Fries and Nichols, representing our local Las Cruces office. Fred Lopez is with Quantum Engineering, and not with us here today, but joining our team is Dana Kyle, a local attorney, to help out with any legal issues that may come up along the way. In addition to the folks that you see on the screen here, we do have a deep bench of other folks who are helping out behind the scenes, specialists for planners and engineers that look at green infrastructure, roadway design, and a number of different specialties as well. Our agenda for today starts out with an overview of the process, information on the foundation behind the code update, some highlights from the draft code diagnostic report, and then lastly, some discussion and any Q&A that may come up. Overall, our purpose for what we would like to achieve today, we would like to present the draft diagnostic report for your consideration and receive any direction or address any questions or comments that you may have on that report. So first, starting with the process overview and looking at the scope that's included in the development review. So we are looking at a major review at the zoning regulations, the zoning map, the subdivision regulations, also the design standards that are things like landscaping and parking, drainage and flood control, and signs. So those are the major focus, but we also are taking a look at your outdoor lighting standards, historic preservation, cross-connection control, and excavation and curb cuts. So it's also important to note what is not included in our scope. We are not looking necessarily at things like your building code or impact fees, any detailed engineering design standards. Those are typically addressed outside of the development code. So we are focusing on the topics that you see on the screen now. Our overall process is about a 24-month process, which seems like a long time, but we have a very busy schedule during that time. And our process is across 3 phases. We are approaching the end of phase 1 right now. It has been a 5-month process so far. And the purpose of phase 1 is to really lay out our initial game plan for moving forward with the code update. We want to identify what are some of the main issues that we are expecting to address, and what are our proposed resolutions to resolve those issues. And it's important to note that the diagnostic is not an exhaustive list of all the issues that are going to be addressed. There will be other items that we've heard that didn't necessarily get included in the diagnostic report or that may come up throughout the process, and we'll absolutely incorporate those along the way. This is just intended to be a high-level overview and summary of some of the main issues that we have identified so far. But to do this process, to do our diagnostic evaluation, we started with a detailed review of your existing plans that you have already adopted to date. Also, we have met with a range of different code users. So those are a range of public officials, also private developers, et cetera. I'll touch more on that in just a moment. But also, we've been working really closely with your city staff to develop the diagnostic report draft that you have available to you today. So again, it's not an exhaustive list, but we are trying to establish a game plan before we move into phase 2. So phase 2 is the bulk of the code update. It's about a 12-month process, and that is when we'll be, again, working really closely with your city staff. We have broken up the development code into 9 different sections, where we'll be meeting with city staff to review those sections, make revisions, and get those sections ready to go. And during that time, city staff will also be meeting with both City Council and the Planning and Zoning Commission to give you all regular updates on that process throughout. And then we'll also be joining you for a midpoint update to present the progress so far and check in if there are any outstanding policy issues or anything that we may need guidance on. We will have some time to talk about that in the middle. Also, during this time in phase 2, we will be doing various updates to the project website, realizelascruces.com. So anything that comes up during this time that may be a notable change to the existing regulations, we'll present that in an understandable form on the public website so we can get some additional community input that way. And then lastly, we have 6 months at the end of the process to focus on refinement of the complete draft code. At that time, again, we'll have the complete draft. We'll meet with you all for a joint workshop to review that, then present that to the community for some feedback at an open house, and then a series of joint meetings following that to make any adjustments or modifications that we may need to make sure that we are incorporating the community input that we would receive at that open house. Next, looking at the foundation and the background for the code update. So you have recently completed the Elevate Las Cruces Comprehensive Plan, and this was a very significant undertaking with really substantial public engagement and involvement through that process. Generally speaking, a city's comprehensive plan has a very robust public engagement program, and that's where you want to really get everyone involved in the community and establish what the vision is for moving forward and what are the recommendations that we need to make and steps to take forward to help us achieve that vision. And then once the plan is complete and adopted, there are several different mechanisms for how those recommendations are implemented. And one of those is the development code. So that's what we are working on, taking forward the public input that went into Elevate. So we're not trying to recreate anything that happened during Elevate. We're trying to bring it forward into the next step. The Elevate plan had about 500 actions, and about 200 or so of those are related to something in the development code. And so here's kind of a look behind the scenes at what we have been working on. We took all 200 or so of those actions from Elevate, outlined them in a spreadsheet, and we've been identifying where in the code each one of those items is going to be addressed to make sure that we are really covering everything from those plans. And so as an example, the text you see here in quotes, that comes from one of the actions to incorporate form-based districts or concepts to help implement the place type overlays and achieve consistency between existing zoning overlays. And so this is an item that we've identified that's going to be addressed through zoning districts, and also zoning design standards. In addition to Elevate, we are also aware you have several other plans that are following a similar process: the active transportation plan, parks master plan, various neighborhood plans, a range of others. But so we are reviewing all of those and bringing all of those recommendations forward for the items that are appropriate to be addressed through the development code. So I mentioned form-based code in the previous slide, and it also comes up several times in the diagnostic report as well as in the Elevate plan. And so I wanted to take just a minute to explain what we mean by form-based code and how that compares to zoning that you have today. So on the left side of the screen here, you see traditional zoning. Sometimes that's called Euclidean zoning, and that is what you have in place today. And you see the large use circle. The main focus on traditional zoning is on the use of the land, and then there's a secondary focus on the building form. The difference for form-based zoning, it still considers both use and form, but the emphasis changes a little bit. So you see the use gets a lot smaller. We're maybe not as specific into whether it's a real estate office or an architect, for example. If we just care that it's an office. But the emphasis on form becomes a lot greater. Testing? Okay. So again, they're very similar, just different approaches, and they both are considering use and form, but we are looking at a shift, at least in the overlay place types, at increasing the focus on form. And so as an example of that, you can see the graphic here. When we talk about form, this is what we mean. What does the building look like from this street? Is it up against the sidewalk? Does it have a setback? How tall is it, for example? Are there any breaks in the planes along the way? So just as some background information about what we mean by form-based code. So in addition to using all of the input that we have received through all the various plans, we have also been reaching out to various code users. And we reached out to a wide number of people. The folks that you see here on the screen are who participated in some interviews. That includes many of you all that are joining us here today, as well as a wide group of city staff. But we also wanted to be sure that we were reaching out to a lot of the development community and then also social media to help push out that information to the community for any input. So with that, I will turn it over to Dawn to give you some highlights from the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Erica.
Mayor, commissioners, counselors, Dawn Warwick with Friesen Nichols. My part of the presentation is to really highlight not everything within the diagnostic report, because as you can see in the document itself, there are about 95 different items that are sort of raised up and identified to give us a guide in moving forward as to how we will kind of shape the regulations to address those issues that have been raised. So we picked about 7 that we feel are relevant and sort of all-encompassing. But again, this is not exhaustive. This is just a highlights reel. So the first item is to ensure that you have a user-friendly document that is not only highly functional for your staff to administer, but also very understandable for users. So that's the development community, but it's also individuals homeowners who may need to come through some type of review process in order to obtain a permit or an approval. So in order to do that, we are looking at ensuring that your processes are streamlined, that there are graphics and tools within the code itself that make it very easy to navigate and to utilize. So we are big fans of utilizing flowcharts and tables to help to explain concepts. It's a lot easier to navigate through a flowchart often than it is a bunch of text or narrative. We also will be focused on ensuring that you have an organized document that is very easy to get through. The online version will be fully hyperlinked, so you can move between various sections of code that are relevant very easily. And we'll also be consolidating all of the definitions from various pieces of the code right now into a single definition section. Another focus will be a roadway design. So several of the recommendations or issues that are raised kind of circle around roadway design. In Elevate and in your active transportation plan, your policies speak to utilizing context-sensitive solutions in your design of roadways and also emphasizing complete streets. So in doing so, we'll be looking at ensuring that there is compatibility for all modes wherever possible. Some of the challenges that we know you have are how to address existing conditions. So how do we retrofit those? It's not something that generally happens immediately, but having something in place, having the street sections to identify the various elements of the roadway that need to be in place will be something that we want to look at specifically. How do we address rural roads? Maybe these are areas that do not have sufficient infrastructure. Maybe they were annexed into the city that need to be addressed somehow. So some of the challenges there, of course, are making sure that we can ensure that there's adequate infrastructure, but also address the fact that there's a cost to doing that, to bringing roads up to code and to providing the necessary services. Connectivity and access are definitely focus points. We want to make sure that you have roads that connect where they're supposed to, that provide multiple ways of getting in and out of locations so that you can mitigate congestion. Sidewalks and safety are also top of mind to make sure that we're providing pedestrian facilities in a safe manner. All right. Erica talked a little bit about the form-based approach to the overlay place types. Zoning districts as a whole will be looked at within the update of your land development codes. It's important that we are utilizing the guidance from Elevate to align your existing zoning districts into the necessary development patterns with the components that address the place type desired development patterns. And another thing that is very important is to ensure that we're addressing nonconformities. Anytime codes are updated, especially when you look at a fairly large overhaul to regulations, you ultimately end up with conditions on the ground that may be nonconforming. Best practices is to largely grandfather those properties into place so that they have the right to remain as is. Oftentimes there is some type of a sliding scale or criteria that identifies when those nonconformities will need to be addressed. And typically that doesn't occur unless that property is proposing some type of change, at which point in time it will incrementally need to be brought into conformance with the new regulations. So each section of the regulations, for instance, landscaping or lighting or other components of the regulations will have an applicability statement that identifies how and when properties must comply with that portion of the land development code. So we talk about how the existing zoning districts will sort of interface with the place types that are identified in Elevate. And so this is just a map from the Elevate plan. It identifies the various place types and applies that to the properties within the city limits. And this table identifies your existing zoning districts. So using the guidance from Elevate, we've identified where existing zoning districts are appropriate or may be appropriate with certain conditions within place types in the Elevate, that are identified in the Elevate plan. So this is sort of a roadmap for us to start to identify what adjustments may need to be made, what might be appropriate within your existing zoning districts to make sure that they can better align with the development patterns that are supported and called for within Elevate. Another topic that sort of runs through the diagnostic report is sustainability and green infrastructure. So this addresses stormwater, renewable energy resources, how and where street trees and shade kind of can be utilized to improve the environment, but also improve your sustainability and just the comfort of your streetscapes and other development areas. How we treat environmentally sensitive areas, whether those are areas of, detention or runoff that have certain specific development concerns and needs. So we've got a great group in the Friesen-Nichols engineering team that specialize in green stormwater infrastructure. They're helping to guide some of this and give us ideas as to how this is best implemented. One thing with regard to sustainability, green infrastructure, and roadway design, it's recognized that some of these requirements will be public and some of these requirements may fall on private property. So part of the update to the code will be to determine how those regulations affect both public and private properties and the responsibility of the various parties in ensuring that those improvements are installed appropriately and consistently. Another component is park dedication and looking at parklands. Both the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, Elevate, and also the Active Transportation Plan all speak to developing some type of program for parkland dedication. That will likely include an option for a fee in lieu for developments of certain types or sizes. It may also include a park improvement fee. The dedication is to accommodate the need for space for additional parkland to meet the needs of new users as you have additional residential units built within the community. That doesn't necessarily address the condition of existing facilities. So a park improvement fee would give you resources to ensure that your existing parks can be brought up to code, maybe play equipment and other types of amenities can be improved over time. And the third component to this is trail dedication. Just as there are typically dedication requirements for streets when a property is developed adjacent to a corridor that needs additional right-of-way, for instance, having a trail dedication requirement would also give you the ability to ensure that as properties are developed, your trail corridors can be contiguous and can be improved and create those connections for walkers and maybe bicyclists throughout the community to give opportunities for safe, active transportation. Residential density, the overlay place types identify certain locations within the community that are appropriate for increased density and infill. So we want to look at how we can make adjustments to the zoning districts that will support residential densities in appropriate locations. This also gives us the opportunity to ensure that across the community, housing choice is available. So oftentimes, development codes that are kind of the age of your existing regulations sort of missed a whole group of housing types in the way that they provided for residential units. They provide for single-family homes, and then they address larger apartment complexes. But there's a whole range of housing types that fit within sort of the span between those two extremes. Oftentimes those are referred to as missing middle. We really look at that just as choice. the ability for people to have choices in neighborhoods throughout the community that provide for your residents at really all stages of their life. One component of that that's typically addressed or typically kind of falls into that category is accessory dwelling units. Those may be attached, they may be detached. So we're going to look at appropriate ways to incorporate those in locations that they fit the context. We've also had several conversations with staff, with the development community about the city's substantial completion policy. Code is the mechanism, your regulations are the mechanism that ensures that development is installed and accepted and meets the criteria set by the city. And that needs to happen in order for lots to be filed of record and sold so that development can occur. So we know that there have been some concerns in making sure that development, specifically residential subdivisions, are complete before houses start going in, more specifically before residents begin occupying those homes. So we're looking at ways to address that. The resolution that's currently proposed in the diagnostic report is that all of the improvements that are required for the development of a subdivision would be installed and accepted by the city before a final plat is filed. So we expect that that's something that may require some additional conversation, but again, the diagnostic report is just that. It's a roadmap for us to move forward. It's not the code itself. It's a way for us to get to the code and ensure that we are not missing any of the big themes or ideas that the city wants to see embodied in its new land development code. And with that, we're at the end of the formal presentation. Erica and I are available and we'll be happy to answer questions.
Okay, I think how I'd like to do this is I'll start with City Council, and then after they're finished, I'll ask our two Planning and Zoning Commissioners if they had anything that they'd like to ask. So I'll start with City Council first. So Councilor Flores.
Thank you,
and
Mayor.
Councilor Vasquez.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Don and Karen, for your presentation. I have a question about the zoning grandfathering in certain parts of the requirements in a proposed ordinance or an ordinance. Can you clarify what that means? You said that there would be a provision that would grandfather in the existing properties, but that gradually changes could be made. And what parts of the city would this affect? Would it affect the long-standing communities that have been here for over 100 years, 200 years? Or does it affect new developments only? And how can you grandfather all of that?
Thank you. For the record, again, my name is Erica Craycraft, and I'll start. Don, if you have anything to add, feel free to chime in. So the updated code would apply to all new development, and then for any existing development, typically the same grandfathering provisions apply citywide. It wouldn't be different areas treated differently. But at the beginning of each section in the code, say landscaping, it would have an applicability section. And so in that section, it would say, if you're expanding your business or your footprint, your building footprint by more than 10%, 50%, that number varies, and that's something that we can adjust. But if you're expanding, then that might trigger those provisions where you would have to comply with that. If you're not expanding, if you're just going to keep existing as you have been, then typically no additional standards are proposed. Everyone can keep doing what they're doing as long as it is legal today. They can continue to exist. It's once they start to expand, or for example, if for parking regulations, if a new use wanted to come into an existing site, but that new use required substantially more parking that they didn't have on site, that might be something that needs a closer look about, was there a certain percentage of the parking that we can modify, or do we need to look at other options for that site?
Okay, so then it pretty much affects subsequent development or new additions
Yes.
for the grandfather clause to kick or be eliminated.
Yes.
Okay, and As far as the public-private versus private properties, what exactly were you, can you please restate that in
Sure.
a way that I can understand it? Thank you.
Sure. So anytime development occurs, there is typically the burden of that development for the improvements falls to the new project. Oftentimes, though, for instance, say there's a new commercial development that is going to generate quite a lot of new or additional traffic to a particular location. That development will be responsible for all of the things that happen on the private property, the parking lot, all of the built form, the signage, the landscaping, but oftentimes they need to share in some of the improvement to adjacent public infrastructure. That may be a turn lane, that may be signalization of an intersection that's adjacent to the development. And so that's where there's a decision to be made about what's the responsibility of the private development and what is the responsibility of the community. So that's something that the code is, always trying to balance and ensure that development pays its way, but that the city is also, is providing the necessary infrastructure to support the development that they desire.
Thank you. And as far as the park dedication on page, I think it's page 21. It almost looks like a 4, but it must be page 21. The land dedication or fee in lieu, park improvement fee, or trail dedication, or those are the 3 areas that were addressed under that caption. What exactly is land dedication or fee in lieu? To whom does that fee apply, and what exactly does that mean?
So this would be a new program for the community. And what you see in a lot of cities, when a new residential development is proposed, they're bringing additional residential units, new residents to the community. That provides a need for additional park space to accommodate those new residents. And so there will be a determination as to how many units or single-family homes, for instance, will require a certain type of dedication. I think that El Paso is in the diagnostic report as an example that when 100 residential units are provided in a new development, that the development is required then to dedicate 1 acre of park space, 1 acre of land to be utilized as park space. That's just an example. It would need to be tailored specifically to Las Cruces. And what we mean by a fee in lieu, there may be circumstances where it's a lower number of units, there's not available land on the site, or there's adequate parkland within the area already. So there would be a fee in lieu calculated that would be consistent with the type of dedication or the cost of the dedication of the land.
So if that was in an ordinance, if that language, what you're proposing, would be in an ordinance, how exactly would you include the measurements? Would you include the acreage insofar as how many parks per area, that sort of stuff? Would that be included too in order to have this equitable for all prospective developments?
Certainly, there has to be some utilization of the Parks Master Plan to understand what the needs are across the city. And also, yes, we would look at the calculation or the amount of acreage required, or the calculation of the fee in lieu. The formula would be part of the ordinance so that it was clear and consistent for any development that came in and met those criteria, that would be a uniform requirement for
And to whom does the fee in lieu go to?
The fee in lieu would go to the city. Most of the time, those would go into a dedicated fund that would be required to be spent within a certain service area that is identified, and it's typically geographic based upon the location of the development.
And how does that compare with the park improvement fee?
The park improvement fee can be utilized for improving park facilities, but it's not...
That exist in a new development?
That would exist in already existing parks.
So next to or close to the new development?
Again, it's probably going to be within a service area that's defined geographically, so that that park improvement fee would go to improve parks in the area that the new residential units are coming into the city.
Okay, so then that means that you're looking at our existing ordinance regarding the requirement for a developer to have, to provide parks. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what we're facing is really a lack of parks, precisely for the reason that there's a park maybe a mile away. And that isn't sufficient for people, especially when there's a problem with crosswalks. Constituent resident in District 5, in fact, with whom I was speaking yesterday, said that a park wasn't being built near their neighborhood, and he has children and grandchildren now living in that district, and that the comeback from the city is that a crosswalk cannot be provided for them to cross to the park. And we have that sort of problem throughout the city insofar as how the streets are being designed. We have streets that don't go entirely across an intersection, which means that by law, by federal standards, there's no requirement to have a crosswalk. So I don't know how we would overcome that. I don't know if, I know that we've adopted the federal guidelines insofar as, from the DOT, federal DOT. The state of New Mexico adopted the entire, framework or recommendations by the feds. So my concern is that all of this may look really good on paper, but in reality, we're facing that situation here right now, today. And are you addressing that at all, or do you raise it at any point? Because it would look beautiful to say, oh yes, we have all this, or it's okay to have a park a mile away from a residential area. Because, I've said, it's wonderful, walking a mile isn't that big of a deal. You can walk in 15 minutes. But if you have, a toddler and a baby in a stroller, and you have maybe, 5 and 6-year-old and a dog to boot, it's virtually impossible.
Right.
Do you address any of that, by the way?
Well, all of this is guidance to dig in deeper and to really start defining what the actual criteria will be. So yes, we will take that into account. And you're right, there are a lot of different components that all have to work together. It's easier for new development because you start kind of with a green field or a fresh start. It's more difficult when you're trying to retrofit and address how to integrate amenities into already built areas. So we're going to work with staff and work with stakeholders and yourselves to try and come up with the right combinations that will result in the kind of development that you all want.
And then another concern I have, and I didn't see it addressed, is the sidewalks. And what we have throughout the city, we have a lot of, you did address the issue of subdivisions not being developed and just sitting there, and sometimes not even maintained by the owner. Insofar as trash accumulation and wind blowing all the time and that sort of stuff. But so do we have, so we have a lot of lots that are sitting empty without sidewalks. So people in those areas cannot access, they have to walk on the street to maybe get from point A, which is their home, to get to point B, which is maybe the place where they can go get an ice cream. And so do you look at any of that? Did you see, did you have an opportunity to, take a tour around our city and see all those odd places where we don't even have a sidewalk, like on Northrise? There's a portion there where there's no sidewalk, and the rule, I think, is that if the law or whatever dominates, is that if you have the other side of the street with a sidewalk, you're okay. But there's a certain area there where there's no sidewalk on either side of the street, and it's near Roadrunner Parkway and Del Rey.
Yes,
So
actually, we've driven around. We spent the morning touring around today and have looked at other locations as well. So we've gotten a firsthand look at some of those examples. Those are things that are under consideration. And again, it's easier when you're looking at new developments and trying to find the right combination of requirements to retrofit. In an existing condition, if the property is fully developed and they're not proposing to make any changes, it may not be that the city can require anything of that development to come in and retroactively install a sidewalk. That may be something that falls to a capital project later, that is where the city is trying to address sidewalk gaps at various locations throughout the city. So not everything will be accomplished through just establishing new regulations, because if a development is fully complete and operational, they may not need to come in for any type of approval that would then trigger a new requirement. So those are things that we are talking with the city about, and they're aware that there may be things that don't get accomplished through these regulations immediately, that they're incremental, and that there may be other projects that the city has to fill in the gaps.
So that raises a question of roads and any kind of, you did have those safe roads or something there, but so that takes into account developers, or who exactly would be looking at making sure we have bike lanes and walking areas and that sort of stuff? Is that covered by what you
Talk about street
are, is that within the purview of your job here?
Somewhat. So one way we will be addressing that is through the roadway cross-sections that show the total right-of-way width, and then what is within that right-of-way. How many lanes, how wide are they? Is there a sidewalk, a parkway, a bike lane, for example? The locations of the bike lanes, that's not something that we would be designating. We would be relying back on your active transportation plan and your Parks Master Plan to identify where those are. But we would be developing the cross-sections for those, and that is one thing we understand needs to be variable based on the available right-of-way.
Right, and so, okay. And then as far as on page 26, before that, you addressed residential density and that the existing code has a missing range, which is the quote, missing middle, unquote. What exactly does that mean? That's regarding housing,
Yes,
correct?
yes, it does. So the term missing middle refers to anything that's in between a detached single-family home and a larger apartment complex. So that means things like a duplex, triplex, quadplex, or even a detached single-family bungalow court where you have a smaller footprint of detached single-family, maybe sharing a courtyard. So just some different options where we can look to increase density incrementally in a way that's compatible with existing neighborhoods or nearby neighborhoods, also to provide some affordable housing options in the community. So some of those are addressed in the current code. It's just not quite as refined as we would recommend it to be.
Okay, one of the things that we've discussed previously is and I know Sharon Thomas has been a proponent, as am I, about having a...
Excuse me, Counselor, can you lift your microphone up to your... Thank you.
Right there? Oh, okay. You mean my voice isn't loud enough? Geez, then you didn't hear anything I said? That's good. I'm glad you didn't hear anything. Anyway, I wasn't talking about you anyway, so that's okay. So about having, say, changing the code so that someone in the existing communities, not new development, but existing communities, who would be able to, we'd have a code that allows a residential dwelling to perhaps add a second floor and make it a home and a business, or maybe not add a second floor, but any modification perhaps that would allow a business and a home type of use for that dwelling business. So number one, are you addressing that? And number two, would then that kick in the grandfather clause? Would it kick it out of a use? Or do you know?
You're asking a couple different questions here.
Yeah.
Let me make sure I'm getting them all. So as far as whether you can have a business in a home, there are a couple different regulations that apply there. One of those is home occupation codes. And so that's something that we would be looking at to make sure that if someone is just working from home, not really generating any extra traffic, we generally want to support that in people's homes. There are some other provisions that come up outside of the development code that affect that, some commercial building codes that is not included in what we're looking at. That's something that would be separately updated to see whether a commercial business could be conducted inside of a single-family home. So there's some other conversations that would need to happen with that too. We are looking at accessory dwellings, whether those are part of the house or detached from the house, and sometimes that's something that folks will construct an accessory dwelling unit, and maybe would they want to use that for their home business. So that's something that we'll be looking at as well. Did I miss any other parts of your question there?
No, I think you did,
Okay.
but, and I'm thinking also specifically of infill, an infill type of development where there is perhaps an opportunity to purchase land in an area that isn't definitely zoned one way or the other. I mean, so would then that kick in, kick out the grandfather clause of existing, whatever?
I think it depends on which part of the grandfathering clause you mean, and if there's a new development that's coming in. So if I have a single-family home and I'm going to add a second story and I want to have a business in there, so if I'm expanding my floor area by 50% to add a second story, then that may trigger the compliance with parking standards, for example, if I'm putting in a business.
Oh, yes, okay. And, okay, I think my last question is about, on page 26, the substantial completion policy, and you addressed at least a couple of things there, but one of them was the incomplete subdivision. Would you please explain to me how that affects a developer or the city or both?
So really what it comes down to is how much of the required infrastructure is complete, installed, inspected, accepted by the city before a developer is able to file a final plat. And that's basically a trigger point to determine that, the lots are now available, they can be transferred, they can be submitted for building permits for now existing residential lots. And I think that what we've seen is that in the past, there have been different levels of completion that have been accepted for reaching that final plat filing benchmark. And so it's not been consistent across the board. So what we want to do is ensure that all projects that have the same criteria are meeting those standards, and that the final plat comes when the city has inspected and accepted all of the necessary public improvements, so that we're not in a position, the city's not in a position that someone now occupies a lot within that new development, but it doesn't have the necessary infrastructure. So that's really where we're trying to find the right way to codify substantial completion.
So is that a way of expediting development for someone who's already started it? Is that the goal?
The goal is not specifically to expedite it, it's to ensure that the city's not at risk for the improvements not being installed adequately and people occupying a new residential lot but not having adequate utilities or streets.
I see. So that would require a lot of inspection along the way.
It's required now, so it's not necessarily a change, but it may sort of change the order of the sequential order of things.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you for addressing my questions.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Before I get to Councilor Vasquez, I just wanted to just kind of briefly just mention that the city, in 2001, we did a zone code, and if you recall, sometimes once in a while we have some vacant land that never got rezoned, and so they'll come before us, and maybe at once upon a time it was zone C1 and it had a different use, and then in our new zoning code, it's really a C2. So that's why sometimes you see me putting on the consent, because they really didn't change anything. It's just that they never got it approved way back then. And so, we'll just go ahead and approve it. And so I think, Councilor, when we talk about the grandfather is as long as they don't do anything with that land, they're under that old code. Once they want to try to sell it or do something with it, they got to bring it up to the new code. So this new code, what we're looking at, is really based on Elevate Las Cruces. When we had all those community meetings, people from around the city came and gave their input. So what Freese and Nichols is doing is they're taking all that data and all those comments and bringing it back to us in what they want to see the future of Las Cruces look like. And so in what we did in 2001 is there was like a certain time period that if you wanted to bring your land up to standard, you could do it. And a lot of people did it, but then a lot of them didn't. That's why, oh gosh, I still remember those days, 2002, 2003, we had so many different approvals that we had to do. That was technically what they talked about the grandfather. So it was under the old code. As long as you don't do anything with it or you don't add to it, then you still fall into the old code. And so we hired this company to do, because back then it took staff years to finish that zoning code. And Freese and Nichols are professionals who that's all they do. And so that, and our city staff is continually doing their other things that they're doing. So this is why it's worked out pretty good. This is the first time we've ever done this, doing this. And I think it's really a great opportunity and for other local governments to see how, because business continues that we have to do. And if we didn't have Freese and Nichols, then they'd have to be doing this, and they'd have to stop and then go work, kind of like studying at night, do this a bit later, and then I'd go back, go back and forth, it'd take years. So I just wanted to just share with you a little bit about that. But I want to tell you briefly about the parks. I think we had a successful geo bond, and that may be something that we may want to look at in the future, because to come up with the different parks, the money, and then what we have to do, the city, is come up with the money for the employees to maintain them. So those are some of the things that I think we're going to have to look at in the future. So I just wanted to share that with you. Councilor Vasquez.
Thank you.
No, I think it was Councilor Vasquez and then Councilor Bencom.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Craycroft, as well, for your presentation. So I understand you're just giving us kind of an update of where you're at in the process, and so just want to ask a couple of questions and make sure that there's a couple of points made, I think, in this process in terms of where we go from here. So I think land use regulation can really help or hurt a community depending on how it's implemented and how rigid it is. Since I've been here on the council, I've really been promoting more flexible uses, especially within infill areas of things like residential retail, allowing things like galleries, for example, or small retail operations like a jewelry maker or a shoe repair business, or something with minimal traffic that would actually be allowed in a residential area that's not just a home-based business, that you're running from your computer. And so I think that's really important to continue to consider, even if it may be non-traditional, because that the barrier, I think, to access even something as common as a storefront for an entrepreneur to have an opportunity to sell a product, that's not available to everybody. That's available to people with certain access to capital and certain income levels and certain requirements to even get a loan from a bank. And so I think being as flexible as we possibly can in allowing those types of uses where there are existing low-income neighborhoods is really important, because we talk a lot here about building wealth, and I think more restrictive land use regulations actually benefit people who have access to the places where they can build, where they can have access to capital, versus more flexible uses in particular areas. So I just want to point that out, and I know that'll all be part of the public process. But sometimes we also have people that are involved in the public process that aren't 100% reflective of the community, because again, those are folks with more time on their hands, with the ability to participate, the tools, the internet, transportation to get to a meeting. And so I just wanted to make that point. I did have a couple questions here. One, was around the building heights and signage regulations. What part of your process here would look at essentially recommendations for building height or height restrictions and signage, and I guess in density as well? At what point in the process are you kind of making those decisions and putting those things together for
Yeah,
us?
so this will be addressed in a couple of different areas. If you look at the proposed new code outline in the zoning regulations, we have a subsection for building form. So that would include things like building height, setbacks, things like that. And then the sign regulations, the design standards chapter has a subsection for signs. So sign height, sign placement, sign types, things like that would all be included in the sign section.
Thank you. And when those recommendations come in the form of a report to council, will there be how will those be recommended to the council? In what form, or how could we expect to see those?
You'll be seeing those sections come in draft form. So the various sections we'll be developing with city staff. As I mentioned, we have 8 different segments that we're reviewing with city staff, and then our 9th meeting with them is a complete review. So you'll be seeing those small segments as they're drafted, so you don't just get a 600-page document at the end.
Sure.
So yeah, we'll be reviewing those in small chunks, but you'll see them in complete draft form. Some of them may have editor's notes throughout them if there's a particular area where we might need additional guidance on something, or something that we think might be a hot button issue. We want to make sure that we're getting it right. So it will be in draft form, but likely with editor's notes.
Thank you so much. And just to add some commentary to that, I think in the city proper, in our infill area here, I think we should be more flexible with our height regulations and height restrictions, and we should try to promote greater density. I think part of the way I think about not just access to services and the transportation system that we're building, that we don't want to expand far enough that you can't pay for the service, or we stretch ourselves thin as a city, but also this home ownership, right? Thinking about where you can afford to build wealth by buying a home. Most new homes and most new developments are happening in one part of the city, and there's not a lot of new areas in the inner part of the city that are more affordable. And so thinking about how somebody builds equity in a home means they have to be able to access a loan that they can actually buy an apartment or a home, or that missing middle housing that you talked about. And so I think if we promote higher height restrictions and more density, we turn down the cost of some of those places, whether they're renting or buying, but certainly want to promote home ownership so that those folks in this part of the city can really build that wealth by buying a property rather than continuing to rent or being priced out of other existing neighborhoods. So I just wanted to mention that. And yes, the only other thing to take into consideration in those lines for me in thinking about a new land regulation code is that the developers who are coming to our city for both housing and commercial developments are looking at these blank canvases that we have in places like the East Mesa, where they can build out purpose-built facilities and shopping centers and retail areas, which is very attractive to a developer who has an opportunity to have the land. And so some of that growth will inevitably continue. We've seen some really beautiful master plans of like these integrated neighborhoods with their own town center, almost replicating like a downtown, right, in the middle of an existing subdivision. And I think all those things are great. But to be competitive with that growth and to provide that same quality of life in the inner part of the city, where we have more low-income areas, where we have buildings that are aging, where we have more non-conforming properties, to be competitive and have local folks or even other developers from out of town look at the inner city as a viable investment, promoting a land use in those areas that it makes it competitive and attractive and perhaps lower cost of entry than in the city's East Mesa or other places of quick growth, I think is really important so that we don't promote economic and racial segregation from one part of the city to another, where one is really invested in and then the other one is perhaps not as invested. So those are all my comments and questions. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Before I get to Councilor Bencomo, I want to just say a couple things, because a lot of my last State of the City address was some of your comments. When you talked about being able to build wealth and for our residents to do that. And so that's why I included a duplex, a triplex, and a fourplex. And I think that it speaks to the very heart of what you were talking about. And that, I think, is what this document is here. And first, I just also want to mention that this is more of a living document, even though if for something, like, for example, about the business that you're talking about, if for some reason it's not included, we can have a work session on it, and then we can always add to it. But I just wanted you to know that I took to heart what you said. And I wanted to use this as an example, because I know you're familiar with this, that piece of property on Nevada. Remember that big lot that it was zoned residential. But if that could be zoned for a triplex or fourplex, it probably would have sold, because then they could buy it. And what's the most important part of this is that a duplex, a triplex, and a fourplex can get single-family financing. You can go fixed for 30 years. You can't do that on a commercial property. You have to change it every 3 or 5 years. So those are the positives with that, and that's what this document is, I think, helping to do, help our residents if they want to buy an investment property so they can build wealth. So I just wanted to let you know that I was listening to you, and I think what you want is incorporated in this document.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councilor Bencomo.
Thank you, Mayor. Those are great comments, and thank you to my fellow colleagues, and thank you all so much for the update and the presentation. I certainly look forward to more. Since literally my first meeting on the council, we had a zoning issue, and very quickly I had to learn about at least some basic understanding of this, and so I'm very excited to learn from all of you as we go through this process, and from staff certainly. But also very quickly I realized how much zoning and code development are layered by class and issues of class and race. Very quickly I started doing research, and everything I really started reading on this is how do we ensure that we're protecting the interests of low-income families, and particularly those who are people of color communities. And so that's how I'm coming into this conversation. And certainly the priority that I want to keep in code development and the issue of equity as we move forward. I did want to I had some follow-up questions to Councilor Flores regarding the incomplete subdivisions. I'm curious about how often this is happening in our city, and if this code development update will impact those incomplete subdivisions, or if we're sort of just at a loss when it comes to that. But not only, I'll stop there and then I'll ask a follow-up.
I'll defer to David Cedillo about how often it's happening, but generally, no, it would only affect future subdivisions.
Okay. And Mr. Cedillo, maybe as you answer the question too, I'm just curious about, then what does accountability look like moving forward to ensure that neighborhoods get completed?
Thank you, Mayor, Councilor Bencomo. So as far as how often those things hit, they happen actually quite frequently. So most of our developments do lack at least some part of infrastructure that is still not completed. Right now, the way substantial completion is written is it states that all utilities, roadway work, curb and gutter, and drainage needs to be installed. That policy was in place before other changes happened to other infrastructure systems like lighting. That's what we're looking at now. So although we do have some subdivisions that are basically having all of those items completed, and we move forward with substantial completion, the acceptance period is somewhat relatively soon. When I say soon, anywhere between 3 to 4 months. We do have a lot of developments that do exceed that. That's where the problem comes in, where we're having people that are able to pull a permit, get their COs, start living, but then we still have other infrastructure that's lacking within the development. So what that causes is basically two things. It causes inconvenience to our residents because they're having to deal with those improvements and not having them completed before they were able to move in to the subdivision. Second, it also prolongs the maintenance costs for those items as we move forward. So what the proposal would be is to have everything completed, out the way, and then we move in. So basically, residents can experience full, complete infrastructure as they move into their neighborhoods, and also that allows those developers to also move quickly through their developments and possibly move on to other projects as well. Again, that's an item that, as Erica and Dawn mentioned, that's going to be an item that we will discuss as we move forward with the development community, with residents. Again, following those initiatives that are already listed in Elevate Las Cruces, because again, this code development is codifying that vision from Elevate Las Cruces. And that's what we're using to move that plan forward. Basically, we're saying, Elevate was our vision, that's how we want to move forward. The development code and how we write it with the design standards, that's how we get there.
Okay, thank you. This is really important to hear because I think, well, first of all, I don't want there to be, I'm sure none of us want there to be tension between the development community and the city, right? But then additionally, I don't want there to be tension between residents and the city because that's who residents will turn around and point to and say, hey, why isn't this finished? Why isn't this done? And so I think it's important to ensure that, again, there's accountability measures to make sure that neighborhoods are complete, as, you know, residents deserve to have complete neighborhoods.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you, Mr. Cedillo. Actually, maybe you should stay up here. The follow-up question to that is about commercial incompletion. And we got an email today, but I get emails all the time about what residents have very cleverly named Skeletor, the building on Main Street and Amador, that has just been incomplete for a decade, maybe longer. And how do we avoid those kinds of situations with this code development update and perhaps even address lingering concerns around some of these issues?
Councilor Bencomo, great question. I'm going to have to defer. We do have on the line Catherine Harrison Rogers. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here in person today, but she is available by phone. I am going to defer to her, but I do agree. We do have to have those mechanisms in place to be able to address those concerns that not only the community has, but us as an organization have as well too, for everyone to feel. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Catherine at this point in time.
Thank you. Hopefully everyone can hear me sufficiently. Thanks, Councilor Bencomo. That's a great question. It's a problematic building. I think that there's some things that we can look at as part of this code update for those types of issues. I think it's something that we also need to review our building practices and our building codes as well. But yeah, it's a complicated issue, but I do think that maybe in terms of some timing provisions or some rules about vacant properties and how long they can stay that way, those are definitely things that we can cover, but I don't think we're explicitly outlined in the code diagnostic.
Thank you, Catherine, for addressing that. And yes, that's something that would be really important for me for this update to be addressed, and hopefully you all can look at it. Do you know what building I'm talking about? Yes.
I know exactly what building you're talking about.
Yes, we all know, even our guests know. Yeah, thank you, Catherine. I appreciate that. I wanted to make sure I raised that concern today, not just for that building, definitely for that building, because I think it's honestly such an eyesore for a part of town that we are investing so much time and energy and resources on, for that still to continue. And so it feels really important that that be addressed and then not happen ever again, for sure. Thank you all. I'll move on to a couple other questions I had. So recently, census data. Thank you, David. I think that might be it.
Actually, I have a question for David. If you want to just put, just after you finish. I was going to ask him a question along what you had asked.
Well, go for it, Mayor, because I was going to move on to something else.
So David, did I hear you say that that some of the developers, you gave me the impression that they actually do have the means to complete a subdivision, but for whatever reason, they haven't yet on some of the things that were lacking, like the drainage and a few other things? Is that what I understood you to say?
Mayor, there are some that do have those abilities too. Now, Every development is a little bit different.
All I was going to ask you is, do we have a ordinance in place, or maybe we need to look at this, to put a lien on that other land that they haven't finished, to kind of prod them to hurry up and get this thing finished? Because I can assure you, if they have a loan on that, then the bank finds out that we have a lien on there, because we jump into first position, they will really come down on that developer to hurry, they don't want that lien on there, and then it'll force them to finish that.
Mayor, to my knowledge, I don't think we have an ordinance stating at that set. But what I will do is defer to Catherine to see if they have anything. But I don't think we have anything in place right now. Catherine?
Thanks, David. So this is sort of a complicated matter. When we're sort of in the earlier stages and a developer chooses to utilize the letter of credit method, we do have the ability to try to draw down on that letter of credit or pull that letter of credit and finish improvements. Most of the issues that we've been experiencing lately are towards the end, where it's really those punch list items that are sort of lingering out there, but can really, really add up. And it is problematic. And in that case, we don't usually have a letter of credit that we can pull on. But I'm unaware of any ordinance that we have out there where we can put a lien on a property. That may be something that legal can answer. I'm not quite sure.
Okay, well, that's perfect. Well, then we'll just we can do this in another meeting, but I just was asking, since you were here, we can look at the letter of credit first. That's good, easiest. And then if we have to default to some other means, we can do that. So, okay. I was just trying to clarify for Councilor Bencomo, and I didn't know. And then when I heard you, I thought this might be something that we can talk about. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. My next couple of questions are about our growth. So recent census data showed that Las Cruces grew about 14%. I'm curious how you're taking that data into consideration as we move forward in the development code.
The 2020 census data has been coming out. We have just started reviewing that as it just came out last week or so. I think the important takeaways from that is that the community is growing, and we need to continue to accommodate the growing community over time and anticipate that will likely continue.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I would love to hear, and maybe not today, but maybe from Sonia in the future, or from any of you, since we have grown so much in the last 10 years, I would be curious to know how many new parks got built in the last 10 years to accommodate the growth. Unless you know that already, that would be great.
I think that's a question.
Yeah, I do not. The Parks Director made.
Thank you.
While she's making her way down here, Counselor, I have to tell you, I'll take the fault for that structure, because in 2019...
You heard it here, folks.
Yeah, I think you barely just came on board, or 2020, we had a meeting, and all I remember, just to jog your memory, is you said, hey, don't touch my window tinter, or something like that. Okay, if you remember that, and then COVID hit. And so during 2020, I never reached back out to the person we need to reach out. I just texted the person who knows that owner. I'm going to commit to you, something was significant, one way or the other, in 6 months.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. And my window tinting guy moved, so no worries. Hi, Sonia.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council, Sonia Delgado, Director of Parks and Recreation. Councilor Bencomo, I don't have that number with me right now, but I will get it and I will send that to you.
Thank you, Sonia. Sorry I made you walk all the way down here for that. I appreciate that. I think that will be helpful information as we continue having this park conversation, which we are also having in our TSI PRC, just so you know as well. My last few questions are just about affordable housing and ensuring that we are very, very intentional about that being at the forefront as we move forward. Just to make sure that, we're including pieces in here about streamlining processes and review that process for for developers who are interested in affordable housing development, especially within the city, because I think, to be honest, right, that 14% growth, we can probably all sort of guess where those folks are living, right? And in the outer edges of town, which is good, and they're beautiful developments and important. And, you know, as Councilor Vasquez was saying, it's so important for us to continue to invest in affordable housing developments within the city where people have access to their jobs a lot faster, to transit, to some of those pieces, right? And so to me, that feels really important. And I was reading over the weekend around some of the measures other cities have taken to make sure housing stays a priority in code development around easing height restrictions or density district restrictions. And some in Minnesota have gone even as far as eliminating single family housing. I'm curious about sort of where, you know, in that line you're thinking you'll fall in terms of ensuring, you know, affordable housing is prioritized.
Well, back on the Minnesota example, so yeah, they have been in the news. They are the first major city to eliminate not necessarily single-family homes, but only single-family homes. So in any single-family district, you can do a duplex or a triplex citywide. So that is an approach that they have taken. There are a number of different things that the code can do in terms of affordable housing, like you mentioned, some of the bonuses in terms of density or height, things like that. Also, sometimes we have offered a kind of a fast-track development if you provide a development concept consistent with some of the city's objectives. So one of those objectives could be affordable housing. If you do affordable housing, here's a faster development review process. Or if you do a particularly sustainable, low-impact development, you can also follow that track. So that's something that we could look at if we wanted to look for ways to incentivize affordable housing. So looking at the processes and then also the housing types, like the missing middle that we've talked about, those are the main ways that the code will be addressing affordable housing. And of course, it's a big issue. It's addressed by a lot of different approaches. Not everything is going to be in the code, but those are definitely elements that we can be sure to look at.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Yeah, when I read that about Minnesota, I don't necessarily hate that. I don't necessarily hate eliminating only single-family housing to ensure that there's more inclusion for housing unit and that it doesn't concentrate any particular group of people into parts of the community, right? And that it's a mixed, beautiful mixed community. And I think the size of our community is really great for that. So to me, that feels really important as we move forward. But I'll stop there, Mary. Thank you so much for entertaining our questions today.
Thank you. We have Mayor Pro Tem and then Councilor Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here and your work and driving around our beautiful city. We love it here, and we want to make sure that it's, you know, accessible and equitable for all people. And so I appreciate my colleagues' comments. It really has me thinking about some things, but I represent the historic district, and so really concerned about, you know, a group spent almost 4 years developing this historic preservation plan. So I wanted to understand more from your perspective how that is, how you're weaving that into what's happening today related to, you know, the code here.
So in our code structure, we do have a separate section that we've proposed for historic preservation, and we know that there has been some recent efforts in that area, and you noticed probably on the scope slide that we had at the beginning, that was more on the minor review, minor alignment, making sure that we're not conflicting with anything there, if there's any of the processes that we need to streamline. That is the main involvement. And there are a couple of overlay districts that we've looked at that aren't necessarily zoning related, they're more historic preservation related. So as we are working on streamlining some of the overlays, some of those may come out of zoning and exist separately under a historic preservation umbrella.
Okay, thank you for that. And then interested along those lines, lighting, sidewalks, all those things are really important in my district, but you see very little of that in some ways, like, for example, in the Mesquite Historic District, right? And I hope you've had a chance to visit and walk around. And so Tell me very specifically, in terms of lighting, because it piqued my interest when you made mention of it, I saw it there. Tell me what that consists of.
Yeah, thank you. I'll start and I'll ask Dawn to add on. So lighting and sidewalks are kind of a tricky issue in infill areas, as I'm sure you know. A lot of what the code is looking at is new development. And whenever we're looking at retrofitting existing areas, again, if they aren't really making any changes to their property and they're just existing as they are, they're grandfathered, and we don't typically require them to come in and do any private improvements. In those cases, it would be a city capital investment to come in and make those changes unless they were undergoing some kind of substantial revision on the properties. Dawn, do you have anything to add to that?
I don't think I can add anything to that. That's exactly what I would have said.
Thank you, thank you. And then lastly, your slide on sustainability. Can you talk to me about sort of, I wrote a bunch of notes, but I can't seem to find them related to that. Oh, yes. Stormwater, water conservation, renewable energy. Yeah. How is that being woven into our code specifically?
So you have several plans that are in place today. You have a water conservation plan, for example, several sustainability-related plans. So we've been reviewing those, as well as the active transportation plan also plays a role here as well. So we are looking at opportunities for both new construction and then also if there's the option to retrofit existing roadways, where we can include some drainage features like what you see here in this picture, where it's taking the storm drainage and using that for irrigation for adjacent street trees. Also for water conservation, sometimes that's things like just making sure that we're allowing rain barrels, rain cisterns, and where those would be for both residential and commercial properties, how that water can be used. Renewable energy sources, sometimes zoning regulations will address the presence of solar panels or wind turbines, how those can be placed on a particular lot. Street trees was a major recommendation coming out of both Elevate and the active transportation plan. So we want to look at that, and also urban shade. I know that was an equity issue that came up with the cool corridors, making sure that that is something that's accommodated. So we would be looking at that. And then lastly, the environmentally sensitive areas, those are the drainage areas and also the hillside slopes. So making sure that the development that would be happening in those areas is sensitive and appropriate for those conditions.
So thank you for that. So where I see some of this stuff happening retroactively, I guess, is around our infill opportunities. So many of us on here have lots of that, and so is there you made mention of this fast tracking sort of thing, so that's what I'm thinking about, right, when it relates to something like this, encouraging people to build on infill and then tying in some of these things and incentivizing and that. And so what would be an example of something like that? I mean, you see all across the nation, I'm sure you work in different municipalities. Can you give me examples about something like that has been positively received by the community?
Sure. A lot of these approaches that you see here are...
Can you step further? I can't hear you
I'm
very
sorry,
well.
I'm sorry. A lot of these approaches are on a larger scale. It's not necessarily for one individual infill lot. So again, that focuses more on new development rather than infill development. But if there were individual upgrades that were happening on a particular site, some of the examples of the fast tracking would be administrative approval for certain things that meet a predefined set of criteria, or waiving application fees in some cases, which, although that may not be committed to in the code, that would be something that could be on the policy level to help encourage sustainable practices that would be on an individual site.
Thank you, Mayor. Those are all my questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councilor Sword.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for all the information you provided so far. I'd just like to go over a couple areas that are of interest to me. And it also adds to what's been talked about by the council so far, too. And let's begin with incomplete infrastructure, incomplete subdivisions, excuse me, as you put it. Now, the electricity for each parcel or lot that a house is going to need is part of that infrastructure, is it not? It is, okay.
Yes.
So this would mean that before a housing permit, before somebody can start digging in the ground to build their house, they would have to have electricity as well as all the other utilities and so forth in place, ready to use, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I think we have some situations where that's not being happened. That's not happening. What about a neighborhood park? Would that be infrastructure that would be necessary before we can start building houses?
I think that's something that we would need to look at, but typically, what I have seen is that the dedication would need to be accomplished, but the park may or may not need to be fully developed. It would really, I think that the criteria still need to be evaluated, and so we'll have to get a little bit deeper into that discussion to determine what the benchmarks are.
Okay, can that be one of the benchmarks? Can we make it one?
That would certainly be the city's prerogative.
Okay. I'm going to put in a request right now that that be one of the benchmarks before we start building houses. You get all the utilities, including electricity, as well as the park designated for that subdivision. I mean, either built or being built at the same time. There's a process in building a city, and I think we should follow that process. And this is one piece of it, is to have the subdivisions completed, their infrastructure completed before we start building houses on it. I mean, every subdivision I've known, with possibly one exception, possibly two, there has been incomplete infrastructure in this city. And I'd like to see that corrected as fast as possible. So that's what I would request, is that we do that as one of our first steps in adopting the comprehensive plan, or the Elevate Las Cruces. Another thing in the same vein is parks. So how many units does the city require to, or how many, how can I say this? How many units does a city have that requires an acre of park in this, in our codes now?
I don't believe the city currently requires any parkland dedication right now. The city staff works to negotiate with the development community, but there's nothing on the books that specifically says what that requirement would be. So that's what we would be proposing codifying.
Okay, so we could set, say, like El Paso has 100 units per acre.
Yes.
We could set that.
Correct.
Let's do that next. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, so, and then I would like to comment on the fact that all the growth in this city is not on the edges of the city. There's not enough growth in the middle, granted, but there is growth in the middle, too, of the city, and some substantial subdivisions, too. I'd like to show everybody here where those subdivisions are. They're within, I'll just say it's on this side of I-25. Yeah, I'll show you. Let me take you. I'll give you a tour. Okay, so that's all I have, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to be going to the P&Z members here in a minute, but Councilor, in theory, what you're asking sounds good, but in reality, it'll be extremely difficult. We can have a work session on it, we can take a look at it, but what you're saying is, I think what you're trying to say is, if a large subdivision has been approved, not just a regular house, a large subdivision has been approved, that before houses start going up, if a park, because let's say there's 100 units, like what you're saying, there are park impact fees or that they're supposed to be paying towards. And in the past, the city would try to add up how much it is and then figure out, with this kind of money, what are we going to do for a park? So I think is what you're saying is you want to see that built first, but, you know, because you made it sound like any house that gets built, there has to be a park. So there's more to it than that. I mean, we have to take a look at it, but I think what you're trying to say is if there's a park supposed to be built, instead of it being built at the end, to have it be built at the beginning.
Yeah, and it's been done. It's
much
been
like
done.
Moscato did in
Yeah.
his development. Yeah, I hear you. So
Dr. Birdie has done that.
Okay, I think if we use that as a model, then we can take a look at it. But that's why I just, okay. All right,
Okay,
I just
thank
wanted
you.
to clarify something there. Okay, so now I'm going to go to our council member, Planning and Zoning Commissioners. So Chairman Thomas, did you have something you'd like to add?
Okay, I think I have to hold this down in order to be able to speak, so that's a little complicated.
Commission.
The question that somebody else asked earlier is this happening around the country? Cities moving to form-based codes, and when I looked, I found a lot of cities doing form-based codes for particular areas because there was a certain context there that they wanted to make sure they were dealing with. And so I didn't find very many examples of doing form-based codes for a whole city. I think Minneapolis is one I found, and maybe Albuquerque did.
Miami.
It's kind of hybrid. So can you give us a little overview like that? So how much is this happening across the country? And is this kind of approach you're suggesting what we're seeing in most places, or are there other approaches?
Yes, great question. So a handful of communities have opted to do citywide form-based codes. There are not many. Miami is the one I can think of that comes to mind. That it's generally larger scale, more developed cities that are in redevelopment mode that already have the urban fabric and framework already established. There's not a whole lot of greenfield development in those cases. But yes, the trend nationwide is definitely moving toward more of what we call a hybrid approach that is a mix of the traditional zoning that I mentioned with the circle and the square, right, and the transition to the form-based. So the form-based is typically used in special areas. So in this case, and coming out of Elevate, those are the place type overlays for those special areas. The town center type areas would be more appropriate for form-based.
So that chart that's on page 54, where you have the use zones and the place types. So before we go very much further, or one of the earlier next, can you flesh that out a little more so we can kind of see what kinds of place types you're suggesting and what kinds of zones?
Sure. You're talking about this table?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
And my, what I'm looking for is, and I think it's a lot of what you've been talking about here, is that this will not really affect much new suburban because it would be too expensive to retrofit it, and you know, that's probably not going to happen. You're primarily focused on new subdivisions, but as Councilor Box has brought up, we're very concerned about the older neighborhoods around the downtown. We've been studying those corridors, a couple of corridors, South Solano and El Paseo, and we would like, as he was saying, those neighborhoods to be able to have more commercial mixed in, to have this ability to do this missing middle, build wealth, have a duplex, those kinds of things. So with what we're doing here, will that help that, or do we need to do something else?
Yes, it will. So backing up to this map, this is from the Elevate plan. This is the development plan. And this is showing the different place types. And this is a long-range guidance map that whenever a rezoning request would come in, this is something that P&Z and Council would both be looking at. Okay, well, what does our comprehensive plan say that this use should be in, or excuse me, this land type should be in 10 years or 20 years. Maybe it's not always appropriate right then, but in the foreseeable future. So this is the guiding document. And within Elevate, each one of those place types, those categories from that map, are shown on this matrix along the left side of that, the vertical column. And in Elevate, each one of the place type descriptions included a list of appropriate zoning districts for that particular place type. So it's not necessarily one-to-one, this place type equals this zoning district. There can be some overlap in those. And in this chart, this is something that's still a work in progress, but we wanted to show our starting point and what the relationship is between the place types versus the zoning districts, that they are different. So this is something that would be used to consider if a rezoning request came in, is it consistent with the place type that Elevate identified for this area? And some of these, we show them here with the hollow circles, so possibly appropriate with conditions. So for example, business park industrial may be compatible with O2 zoning. So it may be compatible, but may not. So maybe that's something that would be by SUP, or it might require some additional buffering or additional restrictions that may go along with it. So one thing that we have talked about, different from these really, are looking at the overlay districts. And I believe these are all base districts right now. So the base district is, of course, the base. Every area in the city has a base district zoning assignment, and then the overlay districts are in addition on top of that. So they can add standards. Sometimes they actually even remove standards or uses as well. And so what the overlay place types recommendations look at is, in those particular areas, looking at some additional design standards, and those would be the form-based areas. And so as I mentioned earlier about how different cities are handling form-based versus traditional, the traditional approaches are more for greenfield development, is how a lot of cities are using them, whereas form-based is more for infill. So for your question about, does this help with downtown and allowing the flexibility in those areas? Yes, it does, by relying more on the form and less about the use.
Okay, so you're going to use both the traditional, and you're going to use them in parts of what's in the overlay process?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, on the phone the other day, I think I talked to you about the International Energy Conservation Code. Councilor Sword was asking about the completion. So there was an ordinance passed for the city to use the 2018 code, but it's not been implemented. And so if it's implemented, is that doing the completion, that it would include that kind of electrification of homes? I mean, what if a developer wants to do a totally electric subdivision with heat pumps, and then that means they don't have to put in any gas lines. So, and these are some of the conversations that are going on around in the community here, and so I think that whole issue needs to be covered somehow. I know it's not actually in land development, except that they don't have to put in the gas line. So.
Right, sure. Yeah, as you mentioned, that's not typically covered in the development code specifically. In the diagnostic report, we do have a section for items that aren't covered directly by the diagnostic report, but through the input, we've heard these great ideas that should be carried forward. We could definitely add that to that list and make sure that there's nothing in our code that would prohibit that, but we wouldn't really include the adoption of that code within the development code.
Yeah, well, it would be nice to make it an option, and there is a group of people in the community and people at the university that are interested in this, and I can give you some more contacts if you want for, people, local people to talk to. And there's a similar problem with the water conservation regulations. You said a lot of things about suggest or, but what I'm asking is, are we going to have to will we need ordinances to get some of these things included and get them codified? Because in the water conservation regulations, I don't know how much of that has become ordinances or if it's all just suggestions.
So in our process, we have been working on refining for green infrastructure in general, how much are we looking at promoting and incentivizing versus something that would be required. We're balancing that, and it might be a combination of those things. But water conservation would be included within the code in some capacity for things like reuse of rainwater for irrigation, for example.
I think it would be useful for the council to know some of the things you're recommending, and then knowing if there are ordinances or if possible, that's some council needs to consider and we need to look at. So the traffic impact analysis comes up all the time in planning and zoning, and the people in the community always want to have it done earlier than it's done. And I don't know how to address that. It's what's the best time. I think that we need to be aware that it's a big issue for most people and they want to see it done earlier. I don't know if that's relevant to what you're doing, but it's an issue that we see all the time.
Yes, so that has certainly come up as a key topic of discussion, and as I mentioned, we have some other folks helping on our team behind the scenes. So we have a couple of transportation engineers who are helping us with that and working with the city's transportation engineers to make sure that we're all on the same page about the issues and the best practices for that. We can definitely update the draft diagnostic to identify specifically when in the process the TIA would occur.
So something else that we talked about the other day is that I looked up the definition of parkway in the city definitions, and parkway means the space between the sidewalk and the street, and you had this other term, median parkway, that confused me because that made me think it was in the middle of the street. So I guess can we stick to the city definition and leave the median out?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks. Let's see, what else are there? Oh, missing middle. I wanted to say to you, in the last decade, missing middle, there have been permits for 5 duplexes, 4 triplexes, and 3 fourplexes.
In 10 years?
In the last decade. So this is an area that I think is going to require a lot of education. It's going to, people are not familiar with it. They don't see it on the ground. We have one coming in I think he asked for a 4plex, and now he got it down to a duplex. And so then the neighborhood was much more willing to do it. We have that example, and the rest of it's mostly single family. But until we have that on the ground in a lot of places, and it's not familiar, so we're going to have to bring in examples and help people understand them. So I hope that's going to be part of the planning. So I think I'll turn it over now to the other commissioner who's here.
Thank you. My name is Harvey Gordon. First of all, thank you very much for your presentation. I think it was very thorough. I think this has been our first look. I think we have a little way to go yet before we're going to be finished with this. Many years that I've been on the P&Z, we've had many requests for zoning changes, and I think that when we get into, at a later date, when we get into the specific zoning areas, we could probably deal with a lot of thoughts that I have now in mind. But today, I would have just one concern. It's not even a question, and it goes along very similar to Councilor Flores, that I have in the past been very concerned about when property becomes, and has been said, non-conforming, and either due to either annexation, for example, or land taking or land swapping or whatever, land purchasing, people would be subject now to what would be the zoning requirement that they have been put into that they didn't expect to have when they were initially on the property. And I think that we have to come down to some kind of a reasonable conclusion. I don't know if grandfathering is the solution, but something has to be done to protect the fairness to those people who have now subject to city law, where perhaps they in the past may have been subject to county law, where the zoning requirements are different. So we can look at this in the future, and I don't want to deal with it at the moment, but this is a concern, and I think it's something that you have to look at, especially when you get into the specifics of changing zoning laws in the particular areas. Other than that, I think that we've had a first look, and that this is very, very thorough. People have done a nice job. Excuse me. And I'm looking forward to when we get down further into the nitty-gritty.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Gordon. I appreciate that. Councilor Sorg, you had a closing comment?
Yeah, a couple, in fact. I got a question to start with. When will we have our, and this is for staff, not for the consultants, when will we have the complete streets ordinance ready to take up?
Mayor, Councilor Sorg, we're still working on that at this time. We should be bringing that forward here in the near future.
Okay. And also, I would like to comment on your slide. I don't know what page it's on, but the sustainability and green infrastructure, that is something that I would like to see us do a lot more of. I see parkways and medians and other places in the city here where we could capture stormwater to water our landscaping across the city. This picture here you have on the side of the slide here is perfect. It's capture the water off the street, runs it right into where the trees are there and the grasses and so forth. That is what we need more of, and I see multiple places across the city where that's not being done. And it could have been done. And it's been the last 10, 15 years we've not done it. Thank you, Mayor.
And Councilor, you bring up a good point. So depending on how long ago it was, that type of forward thinking wasn't apparent or wasn't there. So that's why this is something that we should incorporate in the future for future developments and how to encourage and really maybe kind of strongly encourage them to do what you're referring to, because I agree with you. It'd be nice to be able to recapture all that or reusable.
It was over 5 years ago. Right in this chambers here, it was mentioned that we were trying to do stormwater capture.
I know, but you said the buildings were like 10 or 15 years ago.
The buildings?
Well, that's what you said. The buildings, you said 10 or 15 years old.
Well, the streets, new streets, yeah. And then the older ones too,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, I thought you were talking about the buildings, because
No,
like LEED certified.
Buildings too, but mainly the streets, I'm thinking of the medians and parkways.
I think all of our new streets have storm drains, don't they, David? For the most part, and anything built in the last 5 years?
Mayor, anytime we do a reconstruction or rehabilitation project, we analyze if there's no storm drain system there, we look to implement storm drain features on there. So I think specifically what Councilor Sorg was talking to was the green infrastructure, and those are some of those things that we're still looking at, how to incorporate based on the specific location that we were at.
But on new development, if a developer comes in, and let's say they want to build on a completely different area of the city that is in the city, aren't storm drains required in those in that division? If it's,
Yes, sir.
a number of streets? Yeah. Okay.
You're correct.
Okay. Yes, Councilor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think what Councilor Sorg, he's able to speak for himself, so if I'm incorrect, apologies, but I think he was addressing capture. I mean, there's storm drains, but then is it capturing rainwater? So that's the question. Thank you.
Well, it goes into the sewer system, and then it goes through its process, depending on what it is. If it's
No.
What specifically?
On the page where it has sustainability and green infrastructure, the first one is stormwater retention and reuse. We're reusing it, we're not sending it to the river.
Well, some of that water I know we use for our water reclamation plant. Is that what you were referring to?
No, we put it
Okay,
where
let's
the
have-
trees and other plants are growing in the landscape. Put the stormwater there. Capture that. Instead of running down the street, ending up in a storm drain that ends up in the river.
Can someone speak to that, either David or Erica?
Yes, thank you,
Or
Mayor.
Don?
So, yes, the stormwater currently right now, we have a storm drain system. throughout. And as part of new development, those are the requirements that they capture any excess runoff and hold it. I think what Councilor Sorg is talking about is instead of sending that water to a facility through that drainage system, is incorporate and use that water to either retain it on any landscaping along the roadway, or use it to divert it to other areas that can supplement the growth of the water use.
Where is that being done at all in the city? And if not, are you aware of what cities do that? And is it costly? Or how does that work? Just never thought about that.
So I am going to ask Mr. Tony Trevino to come up here and answer that.
Mr.
He'll
Mayor.
have a little bit more detail on that. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, this is mainly a passive way to capture that water. It just used gravity to channel it to where the landscaping is, and curb cuts to allow it to get into the median, for example, as one example. Tony knows.
Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Councilor Sorg. You are exactly right. The rainwater harvesting is an existing tool method to capture the rainwater. However, for rehabilitation of existing roadways, it is quite tough due to the constraints in the right-of-way. But with new development and new roadways, when we do provide these complete streets, we will have some room in the parkways, as mentioned, or in the medians to harvest this water and hold and maintain this excessive runoff. One of the constraints that we're dealt with is any water that is created due to an increase in impervious surfaces from the historical runoff of each site must be retained on site. So all commercial developments, subdivisions, or any development must retain those water on sites where they have those ponds. Most of these new sites have ponds in the front of the property or in the back where it retains the increase of the existing runoff. All existing runoff is required to maintain its existing direction path to the river. In our case is Burn Lake, where all our storm drain goes into Burn Lake. All of our El Molino, our outfall channel, it all goes to Burn Lake where it's retained.
Okay, thank you for that, Tony. Thank you, Counselor, for those ideas, and at least we can take a look at that. Okay, so anything more on the presentation? Yes, Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say, when I tried to find your website, I just put in realized Las Cruces, with a space like you would when you search on Google, and it never came up. It only comes up if I put it in like it is in the address with no spaces. I think some people are going to try to search through Google and maybe not find it, and so maybe you can fix that somehow.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we will take a look at that, and then I think it is linked already on the city's website as well. But we will take a look and see if there's anything we can do about promoting that in the search results.
Okay, well, very good. Well, thank you for your presentation. We appreciate the update, and looking good so far.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thanks to our members of the P&Z for your input this afternoon. So if there's nothing further, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, Gandara.
Motion made by Councilor Flores, second by Mayor Pro Tem Gandara. Christine?
This is on the motion to adjourn the special work session. Councilor Beta-Stuvey is absent. Councilor Vasquez?
Yes.
Councilor Bencomo?
Yes.
Councilor Sorg?
Yes.
Councilor Flores?
Yes.
Councilor Gandara?
Yes.
Mayor?
Yes. Okay, we're adjourned. It's 2:59 p.m. Give us a couple minutes, and then we'll start our work session momentarily.